I am a constant witness of the phenomenon of death. As a doctor, I use all available technologies to bring a person back to life. But there is something elusive. I have seen many clinical cases that cannot be explained from a scientific point of view. It's not possible yet, says intensive care specialist Peteris Klava. Brief biographical information. Peteris Klava was born in 1964 in Riga, the capital of Latvia. He graduated from the Pediatric Faculty of the Riga Medical Institute. He graduated as an anesthesiologist and intensive care specialist. He has been working as an intensive care physician at the Riga Children's Clinical Hospital for almost 40 years. Since 1985, he has been studying global issues related to life and death, out-of-body experience, and human development. Peteris Klava began to look for answers to the questions of what death is and whether there is life after it at the beginning of his medical practice since the late 80s of the last century. The scientist was prompted to study this issue by an incident that resembles the plot of a science fiction film: the nurse who wasn't there. The boy was brought to the hospital where Peteris Klava worked. A gas cylinder exploded in the house where the child lived and a fire broke out. The boy's mother died on the spot, and her son suffered severe burns. Heading to the intensive care unit to the victim, Peteris Klava understood that it was impossible to save such a patient. Walking along the corridor, the doctor noticed an unknown nurse with loose hair entering the patient. She was wearing a strange long robe with a loose fit. The young doctor became interested in an unknown girl. Peteris entered the room in a matter of seconds, but the nurse was not there. Before the eyes of the young doctor, the instruments began to show a deterioration in the patient's condition. Peteris Klava started resuscitation, but it was not successful. The boy died. The intensive care specialist often recalled this incident and tried to find an explanation for who the woman in the strange robe was. Today, the scientist is sure that this was the boy's mother, who came to help her son leave his body. The screams of unhappy relatives at the moment when the soul moves into the spiritual dimension disrupt the process. The moment of transition is full of grace. It should take place in silence, light, sublime sadness. Otherwise, the soul of a dying person will remain in the earth's atmosphere, like a ghost clinging to its home or relatives. Here is one of the cases that has been troubling the staff of the Children's Hospital for a long time. A 3-year-old girl died after a complicated heart operation, and for several more days, in an empty ward, nurses heard her crying. Even those who happened to be in the room by accident and didn't know anything at all also heard the girl calling for her mother. The baby could not make the transition. She was kept in our world, at the place of death, by the screams and sufferings of abandoned loved ones, in particular, mothers. A dying soul must also be cherished, surrounded with care and attention. After all, she has a long way to go, and perhaps a rebirth in another body. There are times in human life that are impossible to forget, and it's embarrassing to talk about them. Doctors, pilots, and cosmonauts usually encounter them. I've seen the inexplicable, but I won't tell anyone. They'll call me crazy, a drug addict, or just take me off the job, is the sad conclusion that the doctor drew based, among other things, on his own practical experience. There were even more cases in Peteris Klava's practice when his seemingly hopeless patients came back to life. Here are a few such stories. One day, a 12-year-old boy was brought to us. He was found unconscious at home. In the intensive care unit, the boy was connected to a ventilator, recalls Peteris Klava. The patient was in such a state that there was practically no hope of saving him. 4 days have passed. Klava was on night duty. He heard some strange noises coming from the boy's room. When the doctor entered the room, he saw that the patient had regained consciousness, and the instruments showed a sharp improvement in all the patient's indicators. A little later, the doctor decided to ask the patient if he remembers what happened to him all these days. The boy said that at first he traveled around the hospital, saw the medical staff and what was happening in other wards. Then he went on a trip to different planets. Peteris admits that he would not have believed this child if he had not given the names of all the nurses and doctors who were with him when he was in a coma. The second story from Dr. Klava's practice. An 11-year-old girl was brought in at night. At their house, a short circuit caused the TV to catch fire. The synthetic curtains instantly burst into flames, and the girl inhaled soot and smoke. She was dying, her face was blue, and she couldn't breathe. No air entered the lungs, and the artificial respiration apparatus did not help. I tried to clear her bronchi, but nothing worked. Cardiac arrest followed. We performed an indirect heart massage for 45 minutes, almost twice the allotted time for intensive care. They gave up. The girl had already been put on a gurney and was being prepared to be taken away. I started writing a referral to the morgue, and suddenly I thought, try again. I approached the girl, checked the reaction of the pupils. Wide, they do not react to light, which is an indirect sign of the death of nerve cells in the brain. Cadaverous spots appear. Further actions were already pointless, it had to be accepted. But I did the opposite. I have completed all the measures that I have planned. And the girl's heart started working. I stand there myself and think, you fool, why did you try? She's left without a brain, she'll be disabled all her life. 4 days later, the girl was sitting on her bed and eating oatmeal. She was smiling at me, and my mom was braiding her hair. How can this be explained? I don't know. And finally, the last case. A 3-year-old boy was admitted to the intensive care unit with severe pneumonia. He spent 40 days on a ventilator and in an induced coma. On my watch, all vital signs started to drop. The oxygen level in the blood decreased dramatically. My parents were horrified. I understood that the boy's brain was beginning to suffer from oxygen deficiency. Irreversible changes were coming, and I told my parents, it's unethical to detain a person in a condition where there's no cure. Why prolong the useless agony? Mom was silent. She was in shock. And Dad fell to his knees, prayed to God, and demanded that I save my son. You do everything you can. Your hands are God's hands now. He will give everything through you, but only through you. And if you give up, then God will have no hands. People in this condition are often inadequate, and we are used to it in the intensive care unit. We give them medicine right away, and they calm down. But there was something else. It seemed as if there was someone else behind the child's father who knew much more than me. And I continued resuscitation. A minute passed, then another, and the boy did not die. And suddenly the oxygen level in the blood began to rise. By myself, no academic in the world would have predicted such an outcome. The boy did not die that night, and the next one, too. Then they disconnected him from the equipment and sent him to a regular ward. Then he was discharged from the hospital and allowed to go home. Every New Year, his dad comes to the intensive care unit with flowers and cakes. Sometimes he brings his son. The boy is growing up strong, and there's nothing wrong with his intellect. With health too, no consequences. I can't rationally explain what happened. You can assume different things, but it was as if I was clearly shown. You thought he was going to die, but he survived. Why should a person know about this? Over the years of practice, the doctor has accumulated many stories when something inexplicable and impossible happened before his eyes. Sometimes it happened that someone, by all accounts, should have lived but passed away. And someone was completely hopeless but to continue to live. Klava has been studying these clinical cases and similar ones described by colleagues for many years. Observing people who have been on the verge of death and experienced out-of-body experiences, Peteris Klava noticed that many of them become more free internally, get rid of their fears. Such people stop worrying about trifles and begin to enjoy all sorts of little things: a blooming flower, a cup of tea, fluttering butterflies. A person who has experienced an out-of-body shock ceases to demand something from his neighbor or lament the difficulties that befall him. According to Klava, a person who has left and returned to his body is not only aware of the fragility and imperfection of this world, but also understands that death is just a transition, not the end of the path, and now he is not afraid of it. I never tell a dying patient that he will die, but I also do not promise that his earthly life will continue. I explain that death does not exist, but only a transition to another state. And that side is as real as this one. A person loses only his material body, but his energetic essence continues to live, traveling through the worlds and uniting with God. The Latvian intensive care specialist is far from the only one who is trying to find answers to the same questions. we will give the floor to his colleague, British physician Sam Parnia. Life after death is absolutely real. After completing his general medicine course at the London Medical School, Sam completed his residency in cardiac and pulmonary resuscitation. Today, after moving to New York, Dr. Parnia is known for his extensive research on the near-death state of humans, which he has been conducting for more than 30 years. According to Parnia, patients who have been in a state of clinical death and who have been resuscitated often say that they have relived every moment of their lives. Moreover, they live these memories not only from their own point of view, but as if they look at everything through the eyes of other people. For example, if they did something that hurt someone, they relive the same pain that the other person experienced. If they have done something that has caused other people to feel happy, they relive the same feeling of happiness. Incredibly, patients constantly report that they are experiencing some amazing new experience internally. They feel that their own consciousness is suddenly becoming vast. While doctors and nurses are trying to revive them, they retain the ability to collect and understand information about what is happening to them, and come to the conclusion that it looks like I'm dead, says Parnia. Exploring the state of clinical death, we enter uncharted, forbidden territory. Nothing suggested that people would learn to bring back to life those who have already crossed the line. So the testimonies of those who have returned are striking and frightening in their similarity to each other. Of course, many do not return from there, but those who have managed to return always change for the better, because they realize that life has some deeper purpose. In conclusion, here is an excerpt from Sam Parnia's book, What Happens When We Die. When a person experiences a borderline state and the brain shuts down, the soul continues to live. At a minimum, it persists for as long as you can be resuscitated and brought back to life. From this, we can reasonably conclude that our brain acts only as an intermediary. It allows us to feel like a person, but it cannot be a place where our spirit lives. Peteris Klava does not call for reckless faith in his words about the reality of the afterlife. He just hopes that this knowledge will help not only to approach the phenomenon of death more consciously, but also to make his life better, more meaningful, and happier. And what is the happiness of earthly life? What is its meaning? The doctor explains in the words of his favorite actor, Yuri Nikulin. In one interview, the artist was asked what happiness is for him. "Happiness is simple," Yuri Vladimirovich replied. "Wake up in the morning, have coffee with my wife, have breakfast, go to work at the circus, work, return home in the evening, have dinner with my wife, have tea, go to bed." Peteris Klava says that these words contain transcendent wisdom and deep joy of life. You just need to live and do what you can, without nerves, regrets, anger, and fuss. Do you believe in life after death? Write in the comments. Dear friends, thank you for watching my video to the end. If you liked it, please like it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It's very important. Thank you, and have a nice day.